Hello and welcome back. It is Monday. I am Mr. Sisotris, and this week I wanted to do something a little bit different. It took me a while to figure out what I wanted to talk about this week. I didn't really have a clear idea, but I do have this idea that I've been kind of bouncing around with for a while, and that is starting a new series wherein I basically give away my English degree for free and just talk about literature, studying literature, analyzing literature, appreciating literature, and just kind of throwing that out there for the world to see. I'm still going to be doing my regular videos. This is just something that I'm going to be doing along with those, but it's something that I've been kind of wanting to do for a while, and I've kind of poked at it here and there, but I think now is kind of a good time to get started with that. So we all love reading, and reading is sort of a vast universe of stuff where you can sort of enjoy whatever you want, and there's lots of different genres, and there's lots of different styles of reading. So what's the point of analyzing it? And that's something I wanted to explore in this series, is sort of what is the purpose of analyzing literature. A lot of people online will say that that's just reading too much into something, and what's the point of kind of going that in depth on something. And so we'll see where this goes. I'm really excited to get into this kind of specific area. I used to be a teacher. I was a teacher for about 5 years at the college level, and it was fun. I really enjoyed the teaching aspect of it, but I didn't really enjoy like all of the administrative stuff with it and dealing with the higher ups and grading and all that stuff. So basically this is a chance for me to just sort of flex my teaching muscles and just be teachery at you without there needing to be anything like homework or assigned reading or anything. I might be talking about stuff that you might want to read on your own, but that isn't going to be a requirement. It's very much going to be sort of a little more casual, just analyzing books, poems, plays, whatever, in a way where if you don't know about it, it hopefully will get you excited to read it. And if you have read it, then you'll get something a little more in-depth out of it, I hope. So we'll see how this goes. But first off, I wanted to talk about a few things. The first thing that I wanted to discuss is sort of what shouldn't be involved in studying literature. Number one is obsessing about the canon. So the canon, as it's often understood, is sort of the accepted list of literary works that are deemed to kind of have the most literary merit or the most artistic merit of kind of everything that's ever been written. And it's sort of expected to be sort of something that everyone studies. It's a universal list. And the downside of the canon is that it's primarily composed of white European male writers. There's a few women in there, and there's also a very tiny amount of authors from other cultural backgrounds, other countries, and it's not a super balanced list. Now, there are sort of enduring authors on there, people like Shakespeare and Dickens and Milton, and of course their stuff is good, but I didn't want to obsess about focusing on the canon as sort of a baseline for being a true literary person. If you've never read Shakespeare, that's fine. If you've never read Dickens, that's fine. There are so many authors out there that I don't think keeping people beholden to a specific list of kind of pre-approved works, like, it doesn't help anyone. So I'm going to try to focus on kind of a diverse list of books. I am going to talk about some of the kind of ones that everyone's read, but I do also want to talk about books, poems, plays, stuff like that by not white European male authors whenever possible, because there's so much out there, and I think it's important to be exposed to perspectives that are different from kind of the most common ones that we see every day. I was in a Facebook group a year or so back, and it was just focused on like literature, classics, that kind of stuff. And it's Facebook, so that should have been the first warning sign. I'm not really on Facebook anymore, but it was great, and it was fine. People were posting about books they loved and everything. And then someone posted this really positive, great post that was just talking about how they appreciated how the canon was more diverse, and that there was more diverse perspectives and different cultures being represented in kind of the accepted literary canon in universities. And it was all positive, and the comment section was awful. It was this vile cesspool of angry people who were like, the canon doesn't need to change, it's perfect the way it is, and it just so happens that all the best works of literature out there are by white authors, and that's not a bad thing, and you just hate white people. And it was just vile. And I left the group. I was like, I don't want to be around these people. These people are nuts. But it definitely showed me just how violently people kind of cling to this concept of the canon. When I was in academia, there was lots of talk of diverse voices and, cross-cultural perspectives, and it was great, but the canon was still very, like, white men and a few white women. And if you wanted to read something else, you had to take like a special course that was like, African American literature, which is over there all on its own, or world Asian literature, kind of thing. And it was always kind of like you could read those other things, but they were their own kind of circles and their own bubbles, and they're different from kind of the main body of stuff that everyone talks about. And while there are a lot of authors in kind of the canon that I really enjoy, I think holding it up as some kind of sacred thing that we should stick to permanently is really limiting, because there's so much out there and there's so many cool things, and there's even like ways where you can take a work of classic literature and pair it with another book that sort of interrogates it. A common example that I use a lot is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and then Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys, which takes the character of the woman in the attic and gives her backstory, and it's all about kind of this post-colonial perspective that you don't get. You just hear that Bertha, the woman in the attic, was from the Caribbean, and she was Rochester's first wife, and she's crazy, and so she has to be kept up in the attic where she doesn't bother anyone. And so you can still read these classic works and analyze them in new, interesting ways, and there's still cool stuff to be found. You can look at Marxist readings of Dickens, which work really well. You can look at Frankenstein through a queer lens, which I don't think Mary Shelley intended that to be, but you can look at it through that lens, and there is some stuff there. There's some cool stuff that you can find in it. You can look at The Tempest by Shakespeare as a post-colonial work, looking at colonization and the effects on characters like Caliban and Sycorax, who owned the island, or who came to the island first, and then, everyone else comes to the island and sort of takes it from them and holds them in thrall. And you've got characters like Ariel, who is sort of basically a servant in thrall to Prospero, and all that stuff. So there's really cool ways that you can look at classic works of literature that are interesting and engaging and fun and necessary. So we don't need to throw them all away, but I do think we need to read more works by authors of different cultural backgrounds, because it just is better for our worldview anyways, because it's challenging in new ways and it introduces new things to us. The next thing that I don't ever want to obsess about is that there's sort of only one way to interpret a text. If a text is good, if it's well written, if it's nuanced and deep, then it can sort of hold up to sort of multiple interpretations, even conflicting interpretations. And there's of course going to be like the obvious things that happen in the plot, but whenever there's ambiguity or uncertainty, it's okay for there to be differing interpretations. A really good example of this is The Odyssey by Homer, which is one of like my favorite things ever, and I will be talking about it eventually because I love it so much. But there is sort of a way you can look at the final sections where Odysseus has come home to Ithaca, and he's kind of in disguise, and he's trying to take back his house in kind of a surreptitious way because he's surrounded by all these suitors who are very dangerous, and he has to find a way to get rid of them without losing everything. And you can look at it in a couple different ways, especially like looking at whether or not Penelope recognizes him when he came back. And you can read it both ways. You can read it as like she has no clue who he is until he tells her, or you can read it as she recognizes him even through his disguise because she knows him so well, and she's sort of working with him to help him take his house back because she knows who he is and kind of clues into what he's doing. And there's two different ways to look at it, and I would say that neither is sort of the perfect answer. I think the more accepted version is that she doesn't recognize him, but you can read it as she does recognize him and she's kind of secretly working to help him out. And both ways you can support them with evidence from the text, and there's no sort of one perfect way. So if you want to analyze it as how does she help him because she recognized him, that's totally valid. And if you want to do it as she doesn't know who he is and isn't really working to help him, but she's working to kind of protect herself, and he happens to kind of fit into that plan, that's also a valid interpretation. So this concept of like there's only one way to read something, I don't like that. And I know that everyone has had those English teachers that are like, this is the one correct way to read this, and there's no other interpretations possible, and I don't like that. So that's not something I'm ever going to focus on. Moving on from that, the next thing that I wanted to talk about is sort of answering the question, why do we analyze literary works? Like, what's the point? The first is that it helps us learn more things about ourselves, because when we dig into a literary work, there's going to be aspects of the story that are sort of reflected back to us, or that reflect back aspects of ourselves that maybe we aren't consciously aware of. But you know, there'll be something in a book that sort of you resonate with specifically, and it's always cool to see like what aspects of a book really touch you or really kind of work for you personally. Number two is it helps us dig into the culture that informed the work. Context is always important, and while it is possible to analyze a book purely on its like poetic, structural, written kind of merits, you know, the language itself and nothing else, you can do that. There is also so much context to be enjoyed and appreciated in something, where you can look at the culture that created it, the culture the author grew up in, maybe if the author moved at some point and is writing in a different cultural context, you can see how that would kind of change that. Even little things such as like how they wrote it. I read this really fantastic article. Oh no, it wasn't, I didn't read it. I was at a conference. Yes, I was at a literary conference years and years ago, and it was someone else in a group where I was presenting a paper, and they were presenting their paper, and it was all about how T.S. Eliot's writing style changed once he moved from writing his poems by hand to using a typewriter, which he used kind of later on in his career, because typewriter was really new at that point, and talking about how just the structure of his poems changed, and how when he was writing by hand, his stuff had more kind of fluidity and kind of a more free-flowing whatever, and then when he started using a typewriter, he became more conscious of structure and line length, and it became kind of a bit of a different voice, which I thought was amazingly cool. And I can't remember who that person was or what the name of their paper was. It's terrible, but it was such a cool concept. And so thinking about the context that informed something is always really cool. And so when you read a book, you get a window into the world of the author, and we don't always obsess about sort of what the author meant or, you know, the author's biography, but knowing the cultural context of what something was written in does help us sort of understand different levels of understanding of the text. There might be sort of cultural markers that if you're not aware of the context, you might miss, kind of like Easter eggs for people who are in the know kind of thing. But it's interesting to study the kind of the world of a book, because no book is written in a vacuum, and they're always informed by the things that happen around them. Another thing is that studying literature gives us the language to describe our world. And what I mean by that is, you know, reading something purely for escapist entertainment is totally fine. I do that a lot. You know, I love YA fantasy, I love romance, all this kind of fun stuff that like you read it just because it's enjoyable and it's not something that you are going to necessarily analyze at a deep level. It might speak to different, things about yourself that you really connect with, and it might explore complex issues in fun ways, but it's not something that you're necessarily going to be like, I want to really do a deep dive and pick this book apart. You don't have to do that for everything, and that's fine. But when you dig into something that's meant to be sort of complex and exploring the human condition, you kind of get new ways to look at world events and the situations you encounter in your life and the trajectory of kind of where our culture's going. And it just gives you sort of more ways to talk about and understand everything, especially when you have someone who's writing about a situation that's similar to things that you've gone through, but they're informed by their own context. It just gives you a greater understanding and appreciation of kind of the way the world works in interesting ways. And I know that sounds very like almost pretentious and stuff, but it's not. It's more just we want to learn more about how the world works, and one of the best ways to do that is by reading widely and reading and analyzing literature written by different people in different cultural contexts. Number 4, studying literature is good because it allows us to dig into kind of the how and why of how literature is constructed, and also why it works so well. It's sort of the difference of listening to the song When Doves Cry by Prince and being like, this is a great song, I love this, and also digging into sort of just how good of a songwriter and a musician and a performer that Prince was. He was one of like the best guitarists on the planet. And not many people know that because, we primarily think of him as like a pop star. We think of his singing, his performing, his kind of wacky persona, but he was very incredibly talented at sort of the granular level of music, and he understood music at a very, very deep level because he played like a million instruments, and he was so good at so many different things that he understood not just how to perform music, but also how to create music. And that's one reason why I really love kind of analyzing literary works, is if you can get down to that microscopic level, you can see kind of on a structural level just how cool some of these really amazing phrases and paragraphs and quotes and stuff, you can see why they're so powerful and affecting because of how they're constructed. And I really like that aspect myself. And finally, number 5, one reason why I love analyzing literature is just because it's fun. And I know that sounds really nerdy. And I know a lot of people are going to be like, seriously, that's the lamest thing ever. But like, everyone likes doing deep dives into various things. When a trailer comes out for a movie series, like a movie in a series that you really love, who doesn't love picking the trailer apart piece by piece to see if you could figure out, 1, what the story is going to be, and 2, how it connects to the other movies in the series. I'm a big fan of the MCU, and so of course we have a new trailer for the next Captain America movie, and I'm so excited for that one. But it's just great, like digging into sort of the lore of the Marvel universe and seeing what aspects from the comics are going to make it into the movie, and what characters are going to do what, and how it might tie into the bigger story. And all of that it's just fun. I love deep diving into literary works because sometimes you'll come across something that really like leaps out and attacks you and shocks you with how good it is or how cool it is, or you'll make a connection and it just blows your mind. One of my favorite memories of grad school was there was this one class, I think it was a modernism class, and we were studying the book To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, which is fantastic. I love that book. And there was this kind of weird symbolism that Woolf was using about like the letters of the alphabet, and we couldn't really understand what that meant or what the symbolism was. And so we were all just kind of talking about it and throwing out ideas. And there was this other student in the room, and she was kind of throwing out some things, some observations that she'd made, and I was kind of responding to that, and I was adding some more things to it. And then something she said helped me make a connection, and then something I said helped her make a connection, and we had this like brain explosion We hijacked the class from the teacher. It was terrible. She couldn't say anything because we were basically like screaming across the room at each other, waving our hands hysterically, because we had kind of made this connection that like the letters of the alphabet was progression through life, and the main character, she sort of felt trapped and she was stuck at this one letter, and she was sort of resentful that other people in her family were at later letters, and it was this whole thing. I'm probably not even getting it right. It was years ago, but I just remember this wide-eyed moment where there was like this electricity, and we were like, oh my god, I get it. And so they were screaming stuff at me and I was screaming stuff at them, and it was so much fun. It was so great when you have that kind of moment. There was another moment in that class where a character, one of the other students, we were talking about The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, which is one of my favorite poems ever, and she was talking about how she had gone into looking at she was looking at the context of one of the sections, which is called the Fire Sermon, which is a reference to a sermon given by Buddha. And she read the original fire sermon, and was making connections to the content of that, with how excerpts of it were used in the Eliot poem. And she said it like made her cry because like she like made this connection, and it was this deep, profound understanding, and it was really important to her, and it was such a great moment. And so that's one reason why I love analyzing literature and studying it and being a nerd, is because you have those moments where something will like leap out and attack you, and you'll make this huge connection, and you're like, oh my god, I never considered that, and it's great. And so that is primarily the main reason why I love this so much. So to wrap all this up, is studying literature nerdy? Yes, it is, but there's nothing wrong with that. And so I am really excited to kind of get into this sort of English 101 series. And like I said, it isn't going to hijack my whole channel. I'm not just going to be doing this. I'm going to be doing other stuff. I'm going to do reviews and whatnot. But I wanted to kind of avoid falling into the trap of just doing like book hauls and book lists, because if you do those all the time, it just sort of feeds into this kind of consumerist, you don't have enough books, you need to keep getting books. And I'm trying to avoid buying books ad nauseum. So I'm going to stick with what I have for the most part, and find ways to talk about books that doesn't involve just having to buy a whole bunch of new stuff, because that gets expensive and I don't want to do that. So with that said, this isn't going to be like homework and assigned reading and everything. If you do want to read along with some of the stuff, you can. I'm going to start off with some short poems, so it'll be something I can show on screen and you can just read just there and kind of dig into that. But I'm really excited for where this is going. And with that said, I will let you go. I will see you next week, and in the meantime, happy reading. Bye.